Welcome to WCEG Talk Radio. We are here to converse, to educate, and to save lives. That is no jive. We are the World Community Empowerment Group where we speak life into the community. Today is Monday, May 8th, 2023. You are viewing and listening to Issues and Answers. I am your host, Norman A. Carter Jr. Our goal is to make you a little bit more informed than you were before you tuned in. Citizens of the world, this is definitely the new WCEG. Did you know that we are now beaming and streaming on Roku? We have our own TV channel. How about that? Like a snowball rolling down the side of a snow-covered hill, we're growing. 8 years and climbing. Now, you may subscribe to us free on your YouTube channel by typing in WCEG Network, then look for Issues and Answers. You can find us on YouTube. We are there. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We are there. You may access via Apple Watch, iPad, iPhone, and Android phone. There is just no excuse for not finding us somewhere to broadcast to you clearly. The topics and opinions are those of the show host, me, and guest. They are not the opinions of management. Don't get it twisted. Direct comments, questions, complaints, and accolades right where they belong, me. Let's get into our show. As I had mentioned before, I worked as a resource officer for nearly 3 years. I was assigned to Shaw Junior High School, which became Shaw Middle School in Philadelphia. Based on my experiences as a student at Edison High School in Philadelphia, I thought this would be a relatively easy job that had good hours and was safe. After I had been at the school for several months, a young female student approached me. She was about 13 years old. She asked, "Officer Carter, do you wear a bulletproof vest?" I responded that I did not. Her response was, "I think you need to wear a bulletproof vest. There's a lot of bad people around here." I took her seriously. The next day and for the next 2 years, I wore a bulletproof vest every day I worked at that school. Today, we have a different problem, but it's based on the same insight as that 13-year-old girl. There's a lot of bad people around here. Our schools are not only centers of learning, they are also soft targets for gangs and for mass murderers. I'm going to talk about gangs later. In March, Georgia's Governor Kemp signed into law the School Safety Act, the School Safety Bill. That new law is the subject of much controversy. Does it go too far? Does it go far enough? Let's discuss. We are blessed to have with us today the Honorable State Senator Nikki Merritt, who represents Georgia's 9th Senatorial District. Honorable Senator, welcome to Issues and Answers.
Hi, Norman. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me on today. I am happy to be on and looking forward to the conversation of talking about this very important topic and doing a deep dive into the issue. It is a very hot issue on everyone's mind right now.
I was going to say, let's jump right in. And the Georgia School Safety Bill, does it protect children and teachers?
Yeah, I will just say this. I understand what the bill is doing. I support what the bill is doing. My issue with I against it was some of the language in the bill, and all we really had to do was amend a couple of wording items. I was trying to strike identifying and deterring youth gangs. That has the potential for racial profiling. I do want to note that the schools already have in place school safety plans for active shooter drills. So I wasn't really sure what this bill is actually trying to do because our schools already have those safety plans in place. It just required to me It's just re-emphasizing what's already there, and it's also putting on teachers training that I really feel like I'm not really sure if we should be holding teachers liable for so much training and identifying what's a gang member and deterring youth gangs. And the other issue I have is this is just the Band-Aid. If you really want to stop gang violence, you really want to address violence happening in schools, gun violence happening in our state, then we fix the problem. And that means that we are initiating mental health supports, social supports, and most important, gun sense legislation that we do not have in this state. The governor has actually made it easier for people to get guns. We have permitless carry now. So, no, this bill does not go far enough. It's just a Band-Aid. I think it has implications on children of color and doesn't really address the real issues or the underlying issue. And to me, the big issue here, we don't have gun legislation in the state. We're allowing anyone and everyone to have a gun. So studies have shown that active shooting drills are not the only measure we should be applying. That is not the only way to address the problem. More drills does not solve the issue. I know I said a lot.
No, it's really an education that you're giving us, because I'm thinking, the way the laws are set up, you can stand outside of a public school or be in a public schoolyard with an AR-15, and there's nothing legally to anyone.
Anyone can have. I've seen people at the grocery store, guns, showing their guns, just like what? To your point, someone could stand outside of a school and just have their gun, their AR just right there. Like I have it. So bills like this, not only are they not a deterrent, but they do not fix the problem. And what we see, and I know this is maybe a little away from school, but what we saw last week, the active shooter alert that happened downtown Atlanta with someone allegedly that is having mental challenges, is one of our veterans, and it comes to find out he may not have been given care of the proper reasons. And not only that, how was he able to have a gun? And now we're back to the issue. Guns should not be in the hands of those that should not have them. And we should have some interventions in place. And the state they could very well enact policies to address those that are in legislation. Very easy.
I on that note, I did some research and looked up the Gifford Foundation. I don't know whether you're familiar with them, but they that's from was it Senator Gifford from Colorado? She was shot at a
yeah.
Right.
I remember that many years ago. I was young. Yeah, I remember that happened. Yeah.
They have her foundation has instituted 10 states adopting more stringent gun legislation. And so it's possible it can be done, but I have statistics here where the NRA is spending millions of dollars, millions. To my latest count, I've got $54 million that they can account for. And they support Governor Kemp and his open carry policy. And this is what they want all across the country, despite the fact that those Republican-led states are the ones with the greatest amount of mass shootings.
Yes.
And
we see it. It's as plain as day. As you're saying, you can go track the states that do not have gun safety legislative policies, violence that is happening in those states. And I was just going to go over real quick some things that we could do in Georgia.
Please.
We could have legislation that required background checks, new waiting periods, or red flag laws that limit firearms those struggling with like mental illness. Two interventions that could be done right there. We could expand mental health, do some mental health expansions. I know we passed the bill for mental health already, but we need mental health expansions and addressed in a way to address gun violence. There was a mental health expansion bill that passed in the House, but got tied up in the Senate for no reason. I can't tell you why it was not tied up. It did not pass in the Senate. And what I just really want people to understand is, people like, why aren't y'all doing anything? Why isn't anyone doing anything? Please understand who controls the legislature, who controls the state of Georgia. By and large, it is Republican control, you guys. It's a Republican controlled state. They have all of our commissions, they have the governorship, they have the House and the Senate chambers. They are the majority. So it makes it very difficult for us on the other side to try to push any type of gun sense legislation or legislation to address the violence that's happening over our state. And it is very frustrating. And now, as we were saying, HB 47, this bill doesn't fix it. And my concern is, when's the next one? And I hate to say that. How bad does this have to get before the governor and the Republicans in the state take very seriously the violence that is happening, and addressing violence by more mandates on our teachers and our schools is not going to do it. Having legislation that basically puts Black and brown people in jail longer doesn't address, putting them in prison longer, that doesn't address the problem that we're having, nor has it proven to be a deterrent when you have more punitive policies at the state level. We need real gun legislation in this state, and it could be done. It wouldn't be hard to draft that bill and get it passed. We could pass it in a day if they wanted to. 2 days tops.
In the meanwhile,
and that's just, it's a matter of like what's going to happen next? When can we expect the next incident to happen? So this is my concern. And when we have bills that don't really do, I thought I fell off. We have bills that don't really do what we're asking, what the people of Georgia are asking. People are crying out now, and they're afraid. They're afraid for their kids to go to school. They're afraid to go to work now, and they're asking us to do something. And it's time that the governor of our state and Georgia Republicans help us in doing something to keep people safe.
I find it mind-boggling that 82% of America wants sensible gun legislation, but that doesn't move the needle for the Republicans. And I hate to make this a partisan issue, but it is.
But it is. We don't control the chambers. It is a partisan issue, unfortunately.
And not just here in Georgia, but if you look at the statistics and who the NRA backs, it's overwhelmingly Republican. Overwhelmingly Republican. And that is, there's no other organization in this country that has that type of power. And that is not only sad, it's deadly. It's deadly. And it mutes voices like yours, you're basically crying in the wilderness, and they're turning their backs to you. And you're speaking for the people. That I don't get. That I don't get. And I think you're temporarily frozen. Now you're back.
Yeah, it's like, really screaming into the. Can y'all hear me? Okay.
I hear you. Yes.
Okay. It's really like screaming into the void right now. And myself and my other Democratic colleagues, We just had Senator Islam, that is our new senator in the Senate. She and a few other of our legislators just signed a letter asking for a special session to address the gun violence that's happening in our state. And our full Democrats, House and Senate, are scheduling a press conference, which I was trying to get the information up for you guys because I was just reading it. Give me 1 second. So yeah, the Georgia state legislators are going to hold a press conference on Wednesday, May 10th, 2023. It is being led by the Georgia House Democrats, and it is asking for a special session to consider legislation to address the epidemic of gun violence in Georgia. So the House Democrats right now have a press. We'll be leading a press conference to specifically address this issue and speak out and ask the governor to act.
I hope that's really broadcasted and highlighted on our local media, state media.
It should be. It's going to be Wednesday, May 10th at 9 from 9:30 to 10 a.m. And I will be happy to send you that press release. Please do.
I'd love to have it for our listening audience. The school safety bill. I had some questions. You kind of you actually answered them. Asked them. I want to know, was there going to be a cost to the citizens? Money-wise, it looks like this is just window dressing. So I don't see any cost involved. Would I be correct in that?
It is an unfunded mandate. That means when we pass bills that basically we're telling like our cities and our counties that you must do this thing and you must do it, and we're not giving you a fiscal on it. We're just mandating that you do it. So then it's up to our school board to figure out how they're going to roll out the policy themselves. I asked them I asked our school board how much they are expecting that to cost. Any implications on taxpayers for cost on that. They're going to get back to me on that if there actually is. Again, they already have measures in place to deal with active shooter and school safety plans. They've always had it, since we've seen the uptick in school violence. So I did ask them that question, how much are you expecting this to cost our county or to cost our school board? So they said they would get back to me on that. But again, it is an unfunded mandate that we, the state passes and we throw it to our counties and say, y'all figure out how to do it. Without really understanding the fiscal impact that it could have.
Yeah, this is a sensitive topic to me because I worked in the schools, and if you're not funding things like more advanced security in the schools, I mean that's a funding issue.
Right.
Don't know whether it helps to have more police in the schools, but every city is short on police as it is. So I don't know how viable a solution that is.
Right.
But the whole crux of it all, in my opinion, and please tell me if I'm wrong, is that this school safety act is not connected to gun legislation. No. And that's the problem.
Nowhere in this bill does it deal with gun legislation.
And that's the issue.
And that's our underlying issue. Instead, and one of my other concerns about this bill was, again, I think I mentioned this before, the implication it has on our teachers. We're requiring our teachers to have all this training. Okay, what if a teacher misses a concerning behavior by their students? They could be open to a lawsuit. They could face unprecedented attacks because they mixed something. I just think that is a lot to put on our teachers. And again, to your point, we still are not addressing gun violence and gun legislation in this bill.
And one thing I wanted to point out, and this is about teachers, and I guess you've seen it in the news media, where we've had teachers who interceded in violent instances in their school, and they were suspended and maybe sometimes charged for assault. But then I think it was last month, we had a teacher who was criticized because she stood by and did nothing but try to call someone on the phone. And in the meantime, the violence consisted. So you have teachers are in this limbo without any legislative support. We don't have any laws or policies in place to protect them. And if we're not protecting our teachers, then we really can't protect our students.
Exactly. And we're at a time where we're struggling to keep good teachers. And honestly, I can't blame them at this point. This is a lot of stress on our teachers. It's a lot of stress on students. You know, some of these active shooter drills, we're not taking into consideration those kids who may have special needs and those who may have some mental challenges, and the impact that having active shooter drills without them knowing. I think that was one of the other concerns that I know I had with the bill, and a few others that you know, some of my parents that were reaching out to me in our district saying, hey, I got a real problem with this bill. I have a kid with special, I just can't have them go drill is unannounced because I'm afraid what kind of anxiety implication that would have on them. But yeah, you know, and it is a lot for our teachers. We're asking them to actually be certified personnel now, and training. We want them to be liable for identifying gangs and gang members in their classrooms. Come on.
Yeah, we're making teachers policemen, and
exactly. That's not their job.
Right. And if they wanted to be policemen, they would have not gone to college to be teachers. That's just terrible. Well, Senator, I know you're up against a hard stop. Do you have any parting comments that you would like to, parting information that you give to our viewers and listeners?
Yeah, I just want your listeners to know that we really need your help in advocating at the state level. Write our governor, put pressure on the Republican leadership in the state of Georgia. Let them know that we are asking for gun legislation. You know, we are all concerned about the violence that's happening in the state of Georgia, and frankly, it's happening all over. And we want real interventions. Not only should we have the mental and social supports for our families, for those dealing with mental challenges, but we also want gun legislation that actually addresses gun violence and decreases and keeps out of the hands of those who should not have a gun. We need that. We need that type of prevention. We need that type of legislation. So I'm just asking you, write to them, tell the governor, pressure them every day that you're afraid and you're angry and that you want to see some type of response, and a response that actually deals with the issue. And I do think that starts with having some gun legislation to reduce the amount of guns that are on our streets and amount of guns that someone can have. So just right, that's all I ask. That's my biggest ask. Put pressure on those that are in charge of our state, and really encourage them that you want something done.
I'd like to say this before you leave, Senator, that this is actually the third program that was dedicated to this. This is the first one where we actually got into the topic. Second one where we got into the topic of school safety. But I will say that there are approximately 10 Georgia congresspersons and several senators that we invited to this to be a part of this this conversation, and you're the only one who has stood up and spoken out, and I appreciate that from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate your being here, and I'm sure our viewers and listeners do also. So thank you, Senator.
Thank you for having me on, and thank you for giving me being able to just talk to others. And we can't say enough, we can't talk to enough people. So it's my pleasure to be on to talk about this topic. I care, I ran because I care about people, and however I can do, whatever I can do to help, I try to do it. So even when folks reach out to me and say, hey, you're willing to speak, if I can find the time and put it on my calendar, I do try to speak to my constituents so that they can so I can address their concerns to the best of my knowledge. So it's my pleasure being on. Thank you.
And please, if we can ever help you, please contact us and we'll be happy to do that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you
Have a
very
good
much,
one.
Senator. Thank you. You too. Ladies and gentlemen, I can't tell you how happy I am to have had the Honorable Senator Nikki Merritt with us today. This was huge. This is huge. I believe we have another guest. Do we have another guest coming in? Miss Shirley Elsie. I'm not sure. That could be just someone listening. But anyway, this is an important topic to get into. Those of you who are listeners to Issues and Answers know that we've been talking about this topic for the better part of 3 weeks. And some of what I might say coming up might be a little repetitious, but it's important. But these are things that we really need to be about. And as I told Senator Merritt, I really hate for this to become a partisan issue. I don't believe in blind allegiance to anyone, any particular party. If your political representatives aren't responsive to your needs, aren't responsive to your requests, you need to get rid of them. Senator Merritt, I'm going to shout her accolades again. The 3 programs that we had dedicated to this topic, Senator Merritt responded to every one. There were scheduling conflicts that prevented her from being on the other programs, and she stated that. But others, and I'm talking about the congressional chairman of the educational wing of our legislature, and all of that committee, none ventured to appear on this program to discuss this topic. And this comes under this is in their sphere of influence. And they either ignored and didn't respond, or they stated that they would come and then at the last minute backed out. That's what happened on the last issue program, is that the 2 people that we had set up for that meeting, that program, said that they would be available, and then at the time of the program, they never appeared. And so I had to sort of feel my way through. But let's get back to the topic at hand. Between 2000 and 2023, there have been 518 shooting incidents at schools. Wrap your hand around that. 518 shootings at schools. I'm not talking about mass shootings. I'm not talking about the ones that get the headlines. 518 shooting incidents at schools. And that's at schools, colleges, and universities. Those shooting incidents have resulted in 401 deaths of students and educators. 741 have been injured. And I want to harp on this injured portion for a minute, because some of you have a misconception to be injured by 9mm or 38 or 45. On like you see on the cowboy movies, where there's a little hole, it bleeds a little bit, and they cauterize it or they take the bullet out, and you're good and up and walking around the next day. These weapons inflict injuries that put you out of commission for not just a week or months, but months, sometimes years, and sometimes for a lifetime. If you remember, I talked about the last program, Kyle Rittenhouse in Kenosha, Wisconsin, hit one person with one bullet from an AR-15, and that took the person's arm off at the shoulder. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about injuries that we don't think about. You just haven't seen the damage done by an injury to a high-powered pistol or rifle. And I think that for once, the news media ought to take it upon themselves to be a little more graphic. Yes, graphic about what they show when we show these incidents of school violence and of mass shootings, because I want to take a page out of the book of Emmett Till's mother, who, when Emmett Till was lynched and murdered, she didn't want anything done to her child's face, to his body. She wanted his body displayed as it was, so that not only America, but the world could see what lynching looked like. And I think the world, not to satisfy prurient interest, but maybe to get the attention of these politicians who are tone deaf when it comes to the damage done and the harm done by these weapons. When you're hit by an AR-15, bone is pulverized, tissue is burned away or liquefied. It's not pretty. As I said, you don't heal in a week, a month, or a year, sometimes in a lifetime. Much of the inflicted damage is permanent. Permanent, not temporary, permanent. Can you imagine getting shot in the leg and your bone is pulverized, and they have to work on it by putting in screws and splints and stitching things together in the bone to get two pieces of bone together so that they will join together and meld together so that you can walk? You'll be walking, but you'll be walking with a very pronounced limp. That's what these guns do. Now, I did some research today. The National Rifle Association, we've been talking about that a lot today. They're powerful. The National Rifle Association has a political victory fund. That's a fact. They have a political victory fund. It aggressively seeks out legislators who will support its egregious interpretation of the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. These compassionless gun fetishers ignore the mayhem taking place in our society as a result of a proliferation of guns and weapons of war. That's what an AR-15 is. It's not a defensive weapon, it's an offensive weapon. They must harbor apocalyptic fantasies. No other group in this country controls politicians in the manner they do. The latest figures on campaign contributions to politicians who support their views is a minimum, this was last election, a minimum of $54 million. Now, there's other monies that they can't account for. And those are monies that we can basically say go under the table to your politicians. And the overwhelming majority of their political support goes to Republican candidates who are their political whores. No other way to describe them. People who merchandise your lives and your welfare for the almighty dollar, they're whores. There's no other way to say it. They are bent on deceiving the public with false information about the Second Amendment and about mental health. They are an American pariah. The NRA has the power to nullify any pressure from Americans to impose any type of restriction on ownership of weapons that are not for hunting, are not for self-defense, but offensive weapons designed to inflict maximum damage in the shortest amount of time. That's your AR-15 type weapons. That's what they're for. It's for no other purpose than killing people. They're not for hunting. They're not self-defense. As I told you last week, these have an effective kill range of 3/4 of a mile. That's something they won't tell you. That's something they don't want to know. So if you fire at somebody who's 50 feet away and you miss them at the right projection, at the right angle, that bullet will travel 3/4 of a mile and kill someone who has no idea what's going on. That's your AR-15 type weapon, ladies and gentlemen. Now, let me give you a little bit of education on the Second Amendment. We did this before. I want to do it again because I don't think enough people are paying attention. The Second Amendment reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Let me say this again. A well-regulated militia was important to these colonists who wanted to overthrow English rule in order to combat a tyrannical federal government, which at that time was England. In addition, it was easier to form a well-regulated militia if people had their own weapons. This was important during the American Revolution because the colonies could not afford to arm soldiers. Soldiers mostly used their own muskets and pistols to fight a war. You know, a musket was accurate up to about 50 yards. The bullet might travel 100 yards, but past that, it'll probably bounce off somebody. Those were the weapons available to those people at that time. None of what they had came anywhere close to the lethal capabilities of war weapons today. We have standing national armed forces today armed with planes carrying bombs, boats armed with missiles, and well-equipped foot soldiers. Nearly every state has a National Guard. There is no need for a militia. Just as there is no need for stagecoaches, Pony Express, or lighthouse centuries. No one's riding across the land saying the British are coming, the British are coming. No. We have radar, we have radios, we have TV. None of these things were available back in 1791. The law has changed. Laws have changed since then. Remember these people who want to hold on to the Second Amendment? They will never tell you that back in those days, people of color couldn't vote, women couldn't vote. Those laws changed. But they're telling you we can't change the Second Amendment. Now, here is the other bugaboo that they jump on. And we talked about this recently on Dr. Wanzo's program. And this is quoted from the People magazine. Mental illness is always a go-to talking point because it is such an amorphous idea. That means it's cloudy, no form, that you can't pin. It's such an amorphous idea that you can't pin a lawmaker down on what they mean when they say mental illness. Try it. Try it. When you look at America compared to peer nations, we rank 9th in mental illness issues. We are not more mentally ill, but we have 26 times higher gun homicide rate than any peer nation. Let me repeat that for the murderous people who support the NRA and their mentality and their philosophy. We are not more mentally ill, but we have 26 times higher gun homicide rate than any peer nation. And we have to be careful because the writer says, I also want to say that it is so stigmatizing to people who are mentally ill. And this is what Dr. Wanzo has said many times, ladies and gentlemen. And this person writing this article says the same thing. People with mental illness are much more likely to be victims of violence instead of perpetrators. So Norman Carter says, stop going for the political okie doke. Mental health is an issue. Absolutely. It's not the salient issue. It's not the overwhelming, the overriding issue. So get off of that bandwagon and stop repeating it. On my last appearance on Dr. Cassandra Wanzo's Mind Matters, which comes up this week on Wednesday at 6 p.m., she noted that only 34% of those involved in mass shootings have a record of mental illness. Now, I want to remind you that Dr. Wanzo is an author and a nationally esteemed psychiatrist. She's got credentials. She is not somebody just got off a bandwagon and spouting a bunch of stuff. She's quoted. She has national recognition, and we have it here on WCEG. Folks need to pay. I told you, to the community. This is a battle against evil. There are evil people at this very moment planning to kill people simply for the thrill of it. Senator Merritt almost said the same thing. They are not mentally ill. Many hate humans of other races. Many hate humans because of their political beliefs, their country of origin, or because they wear the wrong colors. America, we created that problem, hanging on to an antiquated Second Amendment has grown from anachronistic to apocalyptic. People arming themselves with weapons for combat, but having no one to shoot, but innocent people seeking to enjoy the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness that was the foundation of this democratic republic known as the United States of America. And before I continue, let me get into this democratic republic of the United States of America. And for those of you in America who are not paying attention to what's going on in Georgia, because people are saying that Georgia is a player, a big player in what happens in national elections. We have a Fulton County District Attorney, Ms. Fannie Willis, who is called for a special grand jury and who is now in the process of putting together a criminal prosecution against the former president of the United States for trying to bribe and intimidate the Secretary of State and the governor of the state to fabricate 1,189 votes so that he could win the presidential election. They refused to do it. There is a tape recording of his conversation. He even, him and his backers even established 30-odd false electors who were set to illegally submit their votes as representing the voters of the of Georgia and secure the presidency of Donald Trump, who lost the election by several millions of votes. These fake electors were not only supported by former President Trump, but by the 144 some odd people, Congress people, who voted to overturn the election of 2000. That is heavy duty political pressure. And what has happened now is that our governor has elected to establish a review board that becomes into effect, I believe, July the 1st. And that review board is set up for the sole purpose of removing district attorneys whom they don't like. That's the simple explanation. And the actual focus of that will be the Republican outrage at District Attorney Fannie Willis, who, from what I've been told and from what seems to be out there among people involved in politics, the Fulton County has the strongest criminal case against Donald Trump, stronger than any that is being pursued presently in the United States of America. And this is why there is heavy political pressure on this African American prosecutor to get rid of her, to silence her. And I know how that feels, because I know how it feels to be silenced. It happened to me on a smaller level as a police officer. This is happening right now, and you need to pay attention. Again, I hate to be partisan, because I believe having multiple political parties in this country has been one of the strengths of this country. But now we have a runaway Republican Party that is bent on upsetting our democratic republic. They are fueled by anarchists, by fascists, by nihilists, by nativists, and by the NRA. None of whom have the interests of Americans, common Americans at heart. None of them. They're not even listening to 80%, 82% of America wanting sensible gun legislation. They're not even listening to them because they're bought. They sold their souls. And this is the America that we're living with. They talk about the woke generation. Have you listened to Marjorie Taylor Greene lately? She's from right here in Georgia. Have you listened to Jim Jordan lately? How about Ron DeSantis down there in Florida, who may be the next president of the United States if you intelligent people don't wake up? You think Donald Trump was bad? This is a man who's trying to change the history of the United States by denying American, he wants history of the United States edited so that in such a way that we don't talk about slavery, that we don't talk about the errors in judgment that the United States have made, such as the Trail of Tears, where Indians were uprooted. Native Americans, hate to call them Indians, Native Americans were uprooted from their homes and marched on foot 800, 1,000 miles, while soldiers rode on horses and in wagons. And those who died were just left on the side of the road. And they were moved from places like Florida. Can you imagine walking from Florida to Oklahoma to Arizona? Can you imagine that? Ron DeSantis wants us to eliminate that. Donald Trump wants you to eliminate that. The Republican Party wants you to forget that. That's part of who this country is. Have we improved? Yes, we have. But you know what? We are regressing. We're going backwards. And as someone wrote in, it said, "Stay woke. You better wake up," which is true. Because if you think things are bad now, they're about to get worse. And I think what has happened, and I said this probably 3, maybe 4 years ago on WCEG broadcaster Joe Flint's program when I first started with WCEG. They're probably the worst thing that happened to the United States of America was the election of Barack Obama. Because there were millions of people who are with us today who said never again. Despite of all the good that he did, they're saying never again. And they are dedicated to putting down minorities, to putting down people of color, because they never want that to happen again. Because you know what? What's happening, folks, if you haven't paid attention, the demographics of this country is changing. It is changing. And those who identify as Caucasian are becoming a minority. And they are worried that the inhumanity, the insensitivity that they inflicted on so many people will be inflicted on them. And that scares them. That scares them. I don't want that. I feel we're a better country than that. But this is what's driving the fear. This is what's driving people like Ron DeSantis, Donald Trump, and people of that ilk to change the direction of this country and revert it back to what you had in revolutionary times. So it's about time for the closeout. This is going to be the last program of this season on WCEG. Once again, we are growing. I mentioned at the beginning of the program that we now have our own TV channel, which you can access on Roku, and I'm sure other TV stations. You will find WCEG. We are about to go into have our own channel on the Sirius network. And folks, we are just growing, growing, growing. And part of the growing is because of you and your influence and your input into our programs. Now I've got about 5 minutes to go. I've talked about Fannie Willis. I've talked about the trajectory of this country. We've talked about gun violence. You need to pay attention. I'm telling you right now, I'll say it again. There are people at this moment, who are planning the next mass shooting. Yeah, they are. At this moment, there's a gangbanger who's out there on the streets with a 9mm, a Glock, some other AK-47, as happened with Sequoia Turner. Let's not forget Sequoia Turner, 8-year-old kid, baby, murdered for no reason other than her mother was driving, trying to find a store to go to. That happened right here in Atlanta. 8 years old, dead. So all of you who want to go out and support people having these weapons of war, think about Sequoia Turner. Look her up. You can find her easily on Google. It jumps right out. I'd like to close with this. And this is Norman A. Carter speaking. This is not WCEG management or anyone else. This is me. This is the anthem that the National Rifle Association, dedicated to the National Rifle Association, and those persons who support the Republican Party's position on gun legislation. I'm not talking about how you view the national debt. I'm not talking about how you feel about government spending. I'm talking about weapons and weapons of war. This is for them. Oh, say, can you see the folly of the GOP, bribed and bought by the NRA? Their bloody hands are still gleaming. About our dead, they don't care. They grin and share a false prayer. So we die and we cry, but their time we can't buy. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave over the innocent dead lying still in their grave? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I want to thank again the Honorable Senator Nikki Merritt for joining us and giving us some really relevant information. Let's look forward to the Georgia Democrats as they hold their press conference on Wednesday, May 10th at 9:30 a.m. It should be on the news. She promised to send me the press release, and I will be putting that out on social media. I want all to know about it. I think we need to hold the Republican Party and everyone who supports the NRA legislation and everyone who is restricting laws that would protect our children in their schools. I think they need to be exposed. I think they need to be voted out of office. And if you don't do it, it won't happen. Your influence counts. Use it. So everybody, have a good summer, a good spring. We'll see you in the fall. And thank you. It's been wonderful being with you. Thank you for your support.